Hey there, this is guitarist Eric Skye coming at you for the Guitar Note at theguitarnote.com, and today I have a lesson about arpeggios. In my last lesson for the Guitar Note, I did a little overview about how I use scales when improvising, and today I thought I would talk about the other side of the coin for me, which is using arpeggios. So an arpeggio is to play the notes of a chord one at a time. And so what I just did, literally taking a chord shape that you probably know, a G, and literally just playing them one at a time, is probably the simplest way to get your feet wet with using arpeggios. And in fact, it's a big part of my playing. So if I'm playing over a G chord, I happen to know kind of a lot of different ways of playing Gs and all different kinds of Gs all over the neck. And so I could use that shape in the same sense that maybe someone else might use the pentatonic or another scale as a device for improvising. And what's really good about it is nothing quite underscores the notes of a G chord more than the notes of a G chord. And so then when the tune maybe moves to a C chord, if you can kind of visualize C's all over the neck, then you can do that same thing. And so that's a real neat approach. And as we get into kind of more complicated ways of playing arpeggios, always remember that just coming back to the basic chord shapes, the ones that you already know, is a great way to do it. And there's a lot of precedent for that. Certainly Charlie Christian, arguably the first real lead guitar player, that's a big part of his style. And also Django Reinhardt. The next rung on the ladder for learning about arpeggios for most of us is to learn some sort of standard arpeggio shapes. So in this case, rather than just having one note per string, in some cases you'll have two notes per string, and that makes it feel just a little bit more scale-like. But still, if you really don't have a lot of experience with arpeggios and you've only played scales so far, you'll probably find that skipping around is sort of cumbersome. For me, it's really in the right hand that I find it sort of tricky, both flat picking and playing fingerstyle. But anyway, you can probably get a book and find some of these shapes, but I'm going to recommend that you try to sort of find them mostly by ear. So in our last lesson, we talked a little bit about our G major scale here in the third position, pretty common shape. In order to generate arpeggios from that in the key of G, what we're going to do is play every other note from the root. So go first note, skip the second, play the third, skip the fourth, play the fifth, skip the sixth, play the seventh. So you're playing 1, 3, 5, 7, every other note until you get to the root again. Then you start over again. And then you go to the second note of the scale, so that's going to be A in this case, and do that same process of every other note. And then do the same thing for B, and my mangled C there. And just go through the whole thing. D7, which I also mangled, but it's one of those days. But you want to go through that whole thing and be able to play all 7 chords. And the important thing to grasp here is that it's all coming from the G scale, this one G scale. We're not introducing any sort of outside notes. And then the next thing you could do, I mean, this is kind of a big endeavor, so I'm talking kind of long term, like weeks and months maybe, is to find the next shape of G major scale, of the G major scale that you know, and try to generate all 7 chords from that shape too. So it's really kind of about position playing, which not everybody's into that, but that's kind of my thing a lot of the time. And it's great because then you'll be able to compartmentalize the guitar into sort of roughly 4 and 5 fret chunks up and down the neck and be able to arpeggiate your way through all of the chords of all of the keys. Like I said, kind of a big endeavor, but that's a neat thing to be able to do. So the best way to learn this, in my opinion, is to put it in the context of music. So let's pick a tune. I'm going to vote for Autumn Leaves because that's the one we were using in our last lessons, and hopefully we can kind of, eventually sew these things together. So as you might recall, the first 8 bars of Autumn Leaves is A minor something to D dominant. I'm playing D9 at the moment. G major 7, C major 7, or major 9, C major something. I'm mostly talking generic terms about chords. So F sharp half diminished. B7, and I'm actually going to make it a B7 sharp 9. Could be a sharp 9 and a sharp 5, or flat 9 or flat 5. Some sort of altered B7 chord, because we're about to go to a minor chord. And, you know, the biggest sort of cornerstone, I think, in Western harmony is this relationship between 5-1, tension, resolution. And so, particularly when the 1 is a minor chord, you can kind of pile on the tension, because it's going to feel that much better to get to that 1 chord. So you'll probably find me talking the most about what to do over that 5 chord, because there's so many sort of options and stuff. Anyway, so what you might want to do is try to arpeggiate your way through that chord progression. So if the first chord is A minor 7, so play an A minor 7 arpeggio, and then the next chord is D7. So play a D7, and then we have G major 7, followed by C major 7. There we go. That one is just not being my friend today. Anyway, there's C major 7, and then F sharp minor 7 flat 5, otherwise known as half diminished. I can't make up my mind, so you'll hear me use those terms interchangeably. And then for B7, again, because the B7 is on its way, it's the cliffhanger before the E minor, I'm going to pile on the tension, and I'm going to play a B7 sharp 5. And I think that leads nicely into E minor. There's an extra bar of E minor in this progression before it flips back to the A minor, and so sometimes I'll play E7, not very often, but just it's an option. And so in which case I'm likely to play a E7 sharp 5 arpeggio to get back to there. But okay, so the basic idea here is that we're practicing arpeggios in the context of a tune. And this is great because, you know, we always want to put ourselves in real world playing experiences when we're practicing stuff, rather than just playing them into thin air. This is also really important because it's going to reinforce the chord progression to you. And that kind of brings up a little sidebar. Something I always like to tell my students is the tunes that I can play pretty well at, you know, I'm very comfortable with at the gig, are ones that I can walk down the sidewalk and just recite the chords perfectly. Well, not always perfectly, but close to it. Really, you should be able to take your dog for a walk tonight and with no guitar, you know, think about Autumn Leaves and think A minor, 2, 3, 4, D7, 2, 3, 4, G major 7, 2, 3, 4, etc. So you know beyond any doubt, you know, what the next chord's going to be. So when you're improvising, you know, if you didn't know that, how would you build into the next chord if you weren't sure what the notes are of that chord, what the points of resolution were going to be? So it's not enough to just kind of know what key you're in and just blow the scale over top of it. We want to really play mindfully around the chords. And if we don't really know what those chords are going to be, then we're in trouble. So step one, when you're learning a tune, is go walk around the block and try to recite the chords. And once you can do that, you know, this stuff will fall into place much easier. The next thing we're going to get into is going to be quite a bit more weight on the bar. So go put up some more coffee, and we'll settle in for the long haul here. And this is probably brings up a good, this is probably a good time for another sidebar. And that is, if I'm using terms that you don't know, or maybe you want to explore certain shapes and things in more depth, it's a good idea to bring this stuff to your teacher. And if you don't have one, it's something really to think about. You know, even if you've been playing a really long time, I think we all need somebody in our lives to bounce ideas off of, and someone who can look at what we're doing critically. You might even find that if you've been playing a long time, that maybe you should study with someone who plays piano. So it's really not just guitar lessons, but sort of music lessons, or bass, or oboe, I don't know. but this seems to be missing more and more, I think. I think with the internet and so many videos and tablature and stuff that we're missing out on some actual human interaction, which is kind of priceless. I think it inspires you in a way that just can't happen any other way. So anyway, I highly recommend that. We've talked quite a bit now about using the right arpeggio over the right chord. In other words, the tune calls for A minor, you play an A minor 7 arpeggio. Calls for D7, use a D7 arpeggio. So kind of the next thing that you can do is not necessarily play over the chords that are there, but over the chords that could be there. And this kind of falls under the category of chord substitution, which if you've done some accompaniment, you may have experimented with, maybe by accident. Maybe you're strumming behind somebody and you hit the wrong chord at the wrong time, but it turned out to be really cool, And you start to learn that sometimes you can exchange one chord for another and it won't screw things up. It'll still support the harmony. And that's usually because the chords are closely related. So I like to use that chord substitution idea, but melodically, not just for accompaniment, but for generating single note lines. And that gives you some interesting results. So mostly what I'm doing is using pretty simple chord substitution rules. There are, however, plenty of pretty heady, especially jazz books out there about subs of subs of subs, and it can get way out there. For me, I use a couple just really simple rules, and my basic ones are mostly based on the idea of relative major and minor. So for every major chord, there's a relative minor and vice versa. And if that's unfamiliar to you, you can just quickly go check Wikipedia, or better yet, something to bring up with your teacher. So for example, C major, da, 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 and A minor are relative. So if I'm playing a C major chord, for example, I've got the notes C, E, G, and B. If I'm playing A minor 7, I've got G again, I've got C again, I've got E again, and I've got A. So they share 3 out of 4 of the same notes. And then the one note that they don't share, they're in the same key together. So this is not rocket science. It makes sense that they're going to kind of, for the most part, support the same melodic material. I mean, it might change the character of things a little bit, but it's not going to sound wrong. Okay, so oftentimes, or basically, my main rule here, for a minor chord, I'm using the relative major arpeggio. So for an A minor chord, I'm often superimposing the notes of C major 7 on top of it. And so what that's giving me is if I had a friend here to play the A minor, and while I played that C major, when you combine them, you're hearing the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th of the A minor chord, plus the last note is the 9th of that chord, which is kind of a hip bonus note. The real story is in what is missing, which is the root. This is something I kind of figured out in the little bit of transcribing I've done of, say, Charlie Parker or Wes Montgomery, is it seemingly the root is like an ace up the sleeve. It's sort of like the period on an end of a sentence, and you want to hold on to it. Otherwise things can sound kind of fragmented. So I think by I don't want to use the word avoiding, but for lack of a better term, by avoiding the root a lot of the time, it seems to keep things afloat and kind of keep some forward motion in your phrasing. So all these little chord substitutions that I'm doing, that's the one thing they have in common, is they mostly don't have the root. So, but maybe when I get to a certain point and you do put the root in there, it really kind of feels resolute. So it's kind of a neat idea. So for major chords, it's a tiny bit more complicated. You could, and I do sometimes, for a major chord, just play the relative minor. So for G major, I might play E minor. But more often, I use the secondary relative minor, which I believe is a Joe Pass term, and hopefully I'm using it correctly. So to find that, you're going to go to the 3rd of the major chord that you're on. So we're on G, so I'm going to go G, A, B, or Do, Re, Mi, and that's my 3rd, and that's where I'm going to get that minor 7 arpeggio. So that's a B minor 7 arpeggio. B is the third of G. And that starts to come more naturally, but like I said, it's a tiny bit more complicated than the minor chord example from earlier. That brings us to our, excuse me, our D7 chord, or our dominant chord in Autumn Leaves. And so for a dominant chord, I build a minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio from its third. So do, re, mi, 1, 2, 3. It turns out it's F sharp. Which I think I just mangled again. I think that's, yeah, too much coffee in the Pacific Northwest today. Anyway, so that's generally my go-to move for dominant chords, and that leaves us with the F sharp minor 7 flat 5 chord. So my rule for these guys is, because it's an F sharp minor 7, it's going to have a minor third. So you can find that just by going up 3 steps from where you are. So for an F sharp, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and that gives us A. So play A minor 7 against F sharp. So maybe it goes without saying, but you're trying not to remember the rules in terms of, for F sharp you play A. The rule is for a minor 7 flat 5 chord you play from its third, or for a dominant 7 you're playing a minor 7 flat 5 from its third. I know this is starting to sound like rocket science, but there's only a few moves here. You just got to get these 4 moves and everything's cool. But you want to learn them in a way that you can apply to other keys and tunes, obviously. Okay, let's see what this might sound like. So borrowing from our first lesson, where I accompanied myself with just playing the root notes of each chord, let's dig into that and see what it sounds like. So I'll play the A here on the open 5th string, and then I'll play a little fragment of the C major 7. And then playing my open D, I will play F sharp half diminished. And then G, and I'll play B minor. B minor 7, that is. And then for C, I'll play E minor. And then for F sharp, I'll play A minor. And then for B, I'll play B7 sharp 5. And for E minor, I'll play E minor. So in that last one, I just kind of went, well, I could play G major. That's the relative major. So let me try playing it up the neck a little bit. So I'll get my open 5th string for A here, C major, F sharp half diminished, B over G there, and now I've got the C in the bass, so I'm going to play a little E minor 7. And then I'm going to F sharp in the bass and playing A minor stuff. I'll play the B7, and then for E minor, I'll play a little G. So hopefully that makes sense, and you can hear, how that works, and you can hear that it works, and then hopefully it sounds really interesting. There's a million other ways you can do it. This is just the stuff that works for me and that I thought of. There's other more elaborate substitution rules. And certainly when you get to that 5 chord, there's a lot of stuff you can do. I'm a big fan of using the whole tone scale. Sometimes I'll play the half diminished from its third, like I mentioned, or a full diminished from its third. Like I started off with, towards the beginning of the lesson, I was talking about how a real cornerstone of Western music is this 5-1, and it's because you have all this tension over the 5 chord. Sometimes you can play the most heinous thing you can think of, just da-da, whatever it is. as long as you're there for beat 1 of the 1 chord. As long as you land on your feet, I think it's okay. So there's lots of different things you can try for that, and you just have to experiment. Okay, I want to finish up with a few last minute thoughts about using this stuff. First, I want to go back to some of the stuff I said in the first video. I just always feel like I need to say this stuff. It's really easy to get caught up on all this technical stuff as if music making was a formula. If you just knew all the combinations, then the music would just happen. And that's largely true. I mean, you do want to map out where things are, and you want to learn all this stuff. So I don't mean to contradict myself, but the most important thing still is your phrasing. And so, the space between the notes, finding little themes and developing them. If something just popped out and it sounded like a question, the next thing is what's the answer, and then what would you say after that? Think about your phrasing like you're writing. You make a sentence, and the next sentence has something to do with the previous, and then you go on. Then you have a paragraph. Then you have a page. But that's melodic development, and using space and grooving and all of that stuff is so important. So, not to sound woo-woo, but I always try to encourage people to practice in the privacy of your own home, where no one can hear and throw things at you. But try doing some of this stuff with your eyes closed, so you're a little bit more immersed in it. And try singing and playing at the same time. I mean, I'm no singer, I'll assume you aren't either, so maybe this isn't going to be so pleasant. But if you're maybe learning your G major 7 arpeggio, if you kind of went da 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 dee da 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 dee da, this sort of pseudo scat singing thing is really a way of getting your right brain involved, I think, because I think most people can walk down the sidewalk and just whistle melodies they've never heard before, and they sound good, and then we get on the guitar, and if we leave our hands to their own devices, a lot of times they just want to regurgitate the little patterns that we showed them. But by getting our voice involved, we can kind of get that part of our brain involved that's going to really phrase, it's going to put the spaces and the commas and the periods in it that really make it kind of cross over from just the raw ingredients, which is what scales and arpeggios and all that stuff is, into being actual melody. Okay, well, that's all I know. Thanks for tuning into the lesson, and we'll see you next time.